you hear me? Hear me here. Oh.
Can we have Good morning, everyone. Can you please take your seats? We have a beautiful panel, and maybe we'll stand actually, because it's a number of people on the podium this morning. A very good morning to you. I hope you got a good night as we're coming towards the end of this intense experience that is the World Economic Forum and here at Social Innovation House. A very good morning. So we have a panel here on a topic very dear to me, living soils, living systems, the future of food, with representatives from different regions and different angles on this beautiful topic. I'm going to start off with you, Luis, if you could introduce yourself and one kick off how you define regenerative agriculture, and others can jump in and give their view on it as well. But what was your journey to regenerative agriculture? How did you get started on this?
Okay, thank you, Fredrik. Is it working? Yeah. My name is Luis Camargo. I come from Colombia, from Bogota, Colombia, and I'm the director and founder of an organization called Opepa, which is the Organization for Environmental Education and Protection. So the origin of how I reached regenerative started with the realization that humans and nature were quite distant from each other. And considering myself, how I felt that I am nature, it was a big question, because I was realizing many of the environmental problems we had derived from that separation, or that perceived separation. So I started working on how to reconnect people to the earth in order to accelerate a transition to a more sustainable and regenerative future. So that's how I moved into regenerative thinking, regenerative education, regenerative leadership, regenerative agriculture. But because ultimately food is our most intimate relationship with nature. Every day, most people in the world, multiple times, have a direct access to food, and food nourishes them. So it's, I guess, the example of the abundant relationship, or gifting of life relationship, that the earth engages in living systems. Because all living systems actually interact in an interconnected, interdependent system, offering always their best to give life to the best of system. And this is why when we talk about soils, we have to talk about living soils. If we talk about regeneration, soils are critical, because soils are the base from which everything else sustains. This is the place where the sun energy gets captured by plants and gets placed in our biggest battery, which is soil. And then from soil, everything else derives. Soil serves critical purposes for us. So not only in terms of nutrients and maintaining, let's say, the plants that sustain us, but also as buffers for water, so water regulation, as carbon sinks. A lot of the fossil emissions are actually captured by plants and placed into the soil and saved in soil. So good soils actually are storing the carbon. Bad soils and degraded soils release the carbon. So there is a very close relationship with soil health to everything that's happening above. And this is something that's critical for me in regenerative agriculture, is that there's an hermetic principle that says, as above, so below, as below, so above. And so if we have healthy soils, we have a healthy world. But at the same time, there's the soils of human regeneration. So we have to think how that plays a role. We have structures, practices, and processes that are above the soil. But then we have ways of thinking, ways of relating, and ways of being that's under the human soil. So in regenerative agriculture, I think The practical and technical aspects, the visible, are really important, but it is ultimately critical to really work on shifting towards regenerative cultures and working in the human soil. So both soils have to be addressed when thinking of regenerative agriculture.
Thanks for setting the scene. Thanks for that. Can I turn to you, Matthias? Yeah, and thank you for being sponsors here of this panel. As the Bayer Foundation, what has been your personal journey to this?
My personal journey has been bumpy. So I realized last November that I'm sort of 30 years in this food world. Before that, I spent a bit of time selling bicycles, and sometimes I think I should have just continued that. But it's like, there are really cool bicycle shops in this town, actually. I saw. But so I've been a politician, a Green member of Parliament. The 1992 conference in Rio brought me into that space. I also come from a very rural area of Germany. My grandparents were smallholder farmers. I have pictures of my grandparents that look much more like the smallholder farmers we talk about today in other parts of the world. I then was part of the German government during mad cow disease. So the whole U-turn of like the food safety system in Europe was on my agenda. Then I left that space, moved to Mars. I see Nestle is another sponsor, so the cocoa tree being one of the very important trees that are very susceptible to climate change. And then about 6-7 years ago, I got a call and was asked whether I would want to join Bayer just after they have decided to spend the tiny amount of 60 billion to buy Monsanto. So here's the former Green kind of joining a company that just bought Monsanto. Quite bumpy. The definition of regenerative agriculture for me is really simple. Yeah? Imagine organic farming meeting their nemesis, the person they're always fighting with, traditional intensive agriculture. And I don't know whether it's a Davos party and they have a lot of drinks or whatever, but they make out. And the offspring of that relationship is regenerative agriculture.
Okay, that's quite a definition. And what about you, Rose? What's been your journey?
So I would say maybe not very unsimilar from what Matthias was just saying. I grew up in Tanzania. My dad was a psychiatrist and ran a hospital that was also mainly a farm. So I grew up, my earliest childhood memory is of killing a very bright green snake in a very, very green rice field. It probably won't surprise you, I was pretty fearless and boys were slightly scared of me because, I could kill a snake kind of thing. At the same time, I think very from what drives me and my mom for a while when we moved back to Holland, I can tell you that was a total culture shock, was pretty much an organic farmer. And at some point, my first job out of university, I joined Syngenta, which is, the other one, exactly. And so I remember having to explain that when I just moved to Switzerland, that I was working for Syngenta, having previously worked for a Ministry of Agriculture of Rwanda, my close touch with politics in that case. You have to you have to find this reality. I remember this. I used to work for a Minister of Agriculture, a lady called Agnes Kalibata, who now runs. We're about to stop running Agra, and she would always say, look, most of the farmers that I work with. I run a company and started a company called PULA. Are currently organic farmers, right? They have no choice. They are also by default farmers. So we have to figure out the ways that they can adjust to the realities of the farm today, right? And which tools can we help them and can we give them and can they adopt, right? Because we may give them something and they may just well decide not to adopt. That happens more than often, right? So we need to look at, whether it's regenerative farming and whichever label we put on it today, what can they use and what helps them to put all their kids to school? Because the reality is also that we cannot expand the farms that they're working on at this point. For a while, the company that I run, PULA, we develop insurance for farmers. And I remember for a while we were insuring a large-scale farm, about 1,000 acres. But that 1,000 acres was no longer 1,000 acres. It was actually subdivided into 10 plots. And we had the unenviable task to figure out who was who. But everybody was called the same. Everybody was called Wamawa. Eugene Wamawa, Paul Wamawa, Crystal Wamawa, you know. And what you could see very clearly there is that the father had bought this plot, and then all of his sons, and now all of his sons and daughters, right, were owning it. And so we do need to think about what are the tools that farmers can use and can uptake today, right? We're super grateful to be here today with Bayer because they're funding Bayer's crop science, and the foundation are funding a 10 million resilient farmer initiative.
We'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that. Okay.
Okay.
You'll let me tease it later.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Christian, and thank you for being a sponsor as well of this session.
Pleasure.
You have a slightly different angle, right, on your journey to living soils and thinking differently about food systems.
Thank you very much, Fredrik, and thank you, Social Innovation House and Catalyst now for having us. We feel honored to contribute here today. Yeah, our journey is different. So first of all, I'm Swiss and not working for Syngenta. So I work for a company called Food Brewer, Switzerland, a relatively young company. I'm one of the co-founders. And Food Brewer, it's all about food security. So yesterday I checked the latest report from the United Nations. The world's population is expected to peak at 2085. So another 60 years to grow. So we need more food, or we need to distribute the food in a better way. Bless you. So that's our starting point of our journey. So it's all about food security. Yesterday we had the privilege to attend a talk by Cindy McCain, talking about food insecurity in many places, not just conflict-driven.
Head of the World Food Programme.
Exactly, and it was impressive. I mean, she pointed us to the fact that it's not just conflict-driven food crisis like in Gaza, but in other countries in Africa, we have on the top of the conflicts, we also have food insecurity based on climate change. And that's just massive. So that's our motivation to contribute. So basically, we develop technologies to make farming more productive, more efficient. One of the technologies we develop is fermentation of side streams. Side streams very often end up being waste or at best to be used as animal feed. We can turn them into very valuable substances, ingredients that can be used for human consumption. And that's obviously very helpful for making farming more productive and ultimately produce more food.
And just a quick follow-up, where do you do that?
So the technology development we do in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. We have our home base where we develop these technologies. But then we closely work with companies around the globe and also university organizations. And we're reaching out to farmers. So hopefully there are some farmers here. We would love to buy some of the farmer side streams to turn them into valuable products, but also do it the other way around to provide technology to the farmers so they can do that locally, which would be a bit more sustainable, so they can actually turn their waste, their side streams into valuable products.
Thank you very much. And you remind me, it's perhaps worth sharing with the audience, right? If I'm not mistaken, so global food production, roughly 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of fresh water usage. But actually, so those are phenomenal numbers. But then, as you said, the expectation and demand is to double food production, right, over until 2050. And not because we're doubling the population of the world, simply that demand of different food is going to increase. Now, that obviously doesn't work. You can't double 70% of water usage. So something dramatic obviously has to change. And the biggest threat to biodiversity that Luis was talking about is food production. Biggest threat to deforestation is food production. So something significant has to change along the way. Juan, you are among the people who's traveled far to be on this panel. Yeah, Luis did, Rose did, but and you traveled not so far, Christian. And Juan he has some beautiful story to share and his experience to share. He's going to do it in a slightly original way. Juan, over to you.
I'm sorry, my English is good.
Morning.
This is Juan speaking, but he put a lot of work into this, so over to him.
In the Argentine highlands, I met Valeriano, an organic farmer from Quinoa. He proudly spoke to me about how he selected his seeds, adapting them to the wind, cold, and sun, holding on to knowledge that has been shared across generations. Yet, he shared something that was difficult for me to hear. He sold all of his quinoa and purchased processed foods for his kids, because that was all he could afford. Isn't it ironic? In regions where food is grown that feeds the world, rural poverty is greater than urban poverty. That discussion with Valeriano got me thinking deeply. It's not enough to produce food. The essential factor is transforming the ties between producers and consumers. Currently, we have a worrying situation. The earth that was once our greatest life reserve is now strained. Their digestive and metabolic capacity has deteriorated so much that in many cases they are even consuming their own nutrient reserves, essential nutrients like nitrogen. Regenerating is not just about restoring soil fertility. It is about building sustainable systems where families can thrive without the need to emigrate. We wonder, how are we managing the surface of our soils? Are we using up reserves or creating sustainable interactions to boost future fertility? There is something we cannot ignore. 8 out of 10 farmers' children are abandoning their villages to move to cities. Many end up vulnerable, away from their roots, land, and identity. I ask myself, if they are not in the countryside anymore, who will grow our food? What stories, efforts, and challenges lie behind every food that reaches our tables? For many years, we focused on mass production to fight hunger. It worked, but it brought consequences. The loss of biodiversity, a disconnection from the land, fragile distribution systems, and most importantly, the decline of farmers and producers. Here arises a question that I cannot help but ask. Is it fair to sacrifice our biodiversity and rural communities for more kilos of food? More than 10 years ago, I founded Bioconexión in northern Argentina with the intention of addressing questions like this from a holistic regeneration approach. For me, the solution lies not in extremes, but in the meeting point where the ancestral meets the modern, the local meets the global, and the environmental meets the social. Currently, Bioconexión has involved 734 agricultural producers and entrepreneurs, affecting more than 4 million individuals. One of our most transformative projects is Siembra Comprometida, a system that sells square meters of crops instead of selling kilos of food. The buyers, primarily restaurants, pay a monthly fee and share the climate risks with the farmers. All the harvested produce goes directly to the restaurant, creating a real and deep awareness between the field and the table. Currently, we manage an annual production value of over $100,000 and have built a solid bridge between the countryside and the cities. But we go further. We also organize fairs that attract over 200,000 visitors each year, where consumers have the chance to learn the stories behind each product and connect with the farmers. These events not only provide extra revenue, but also enhance the economic and social strength in rural communities. Since the year 2018, we have partnered with Chef Mauro Colagreco to lead the Global Seed Guardian program. In this project, we have recovered over 118 varieties of forgotten or endangered seeds. At this moment, we are focused on building shelters for knowledge and seeds, areas intended for conservation, ancestral wisdom, and enhancing the value of unique products, developing new economic support through tourism and local food. I dream of a network of producers as knowledge beacons, reinterpreting the role of small farmers within society. I wish for these individuals to be acknowledged not only as food producers, but also as protectors of biodiversity and culture, as pillars of a regenerative system. On this journey, I have learned that regenerating is not just about restoring life to the soil, it is about restoring purpose to people. Every seed planted, each cultivated meter builds a bridge between rural and urban communities, providing young people with reasons to remain and take pride in their family's wisdom. Because in me today are the eyes of every farmer I have encountered. Men and women who have taught me that feeding the world is not just a job, it is an act of love. I invite you to be part of this change. Let's sow together a fairer, more sustainable and humane future. Thank you very much for your time.
Gracias.
Juani, you did something beautiful, and you shared with me that it's a bit difficult for you to speak on stage, but what he shared is incredible, that he wrote this with his partners, with the farmers he works with. So this was a collaboration, and it's a message he's bringing from the community he's serving. So thank you very much, Juani.
Gracias.
Starting with you, Matthias, now. So the scale of the challenge is phenomenal and urgent, right? Is how to meet growing food demand and to do so in a different way. How are we able to do this at a scale that really will make a difference? And what are you trying to do in that regard?
Yeah, I want to thank you for kind of dimensionalizing the problem. Because I think that we have too many conversations that leave the factor of scale and the kind of size of the problem a bit outside of the conversation. And Rose, you made that point that for you it's very much about scaling. Yeah, there's a word starting with P, piloting. I was told I cannot use in this room, and I'm grateful for it. No matter who you ask, we have boatloads of small projects that make a huge difference, but they are like boats passing in the night. They are not scaling. And the most dangerous word in the whole debate about the future of the food system is only 2 letters. It's the word or. So we are constantly in a conversation whether you should do one thing or the other thing. The scale of the problem should allow us to pivot to the word and. 3 letters, also a very simple word. And that's what I try to convey with what regenerative agriculture is. Regenerative agriculture needs to address the planetary boundary violations of the food system and solve for the problem that you have described. And why do we have this rising food demand? First of all, a growing population. Secondly, many humans are more wealthy than they were before. We see that in China, we now see that in India, we see that at scale. But there is thirdly, and you described that, it's the urbanization. So even the poor people that move from rural areas into the cities have different food consumption patterns that overall increase food loss and also increase the problem. What we try to do at the foundation is we look for initiatives that are scalable. And one simple metric to do that is, are others also willing to put skin in the game? As soon as that happens, you have a good first indicator that something should work. And there are many projects we are doing, but the one with the highest scale is the one Rose will talk about, which is us giving a little bit that then allows the mobilization of huge funds and traditional actors to ensure a group of people that is currently underinsured or not insured at all. If we want to have rural communities in rural areas tend for their land, increase the food production, for example, in Africa on the domestic level, we need to insure them for what's already happening and what's ahead. Extreme weather events are like a number 1 risk in the long term and the number 2 risk right now for the World Economic Forum. We all know that what we are seeing right now is merely the overture of what will happen, and we see that the largest economy of the world will produce more carbon in the next couple of years than it easily could not. Yeah? So how can we help these communities, arguably communities that have not contributed to the problem, to not be uprooted by droughts, by floods, by other extreme weather events, insect infestations, and then move into the cities, is one of the biggest questions. And what Rose has pulled off is a scalable initiative that gives farmers insurance and peace of mind. And for us, that's really important. We're going to invest hugely in Africa in seed production. But what we need is, we need to make sure that the farmers are able to buy those seeds year after year. That's the peace of mind we need. So we are in a more privileged, but sort of the problem in the same situation. And that's why I believe we can talk about just transition and all these words, but we really need to talk about how do we mobilize money to ensure and shield these farming generations that are coming from the risks that we all know will happen. Yeah? And with that, I want to leave it, but I'm super inspired by what Rose and the team and many people off the ground have pulled off at a scale of millions. I'm not looking at projects that start with thousands. We need to talk about millions because we have more than 500 million smallholder farmers in the world.
That's right.
500 million. Agriculture is the #1 employer in the world. It's not artificial intelligence. It's agriculture. Starts with an A. It's very different business. And oh, by the way, the productivity increase of agriculture since 1945 is unparalleled with any other industry. So this industry has huge potential if we direct it in the right way.
Okay. So, Rose, how are we doing this at scale?
Okay. So we call this the 10 Million Resilient Farmer Initiative. And it basically builds on the experience of PULA over the last decade. Just to put this out there, insurance is not something people wake up to thinking, I want to buy a new pair of insurance, right? That is just the reality. But also the harsh reality is that they need and experience risks. Like, they wake up, you know, like if in Zambia, what you're just talking about, between, you know, like rains last year in January, where, you know, your crop at that point is kind of at knee high or just about to, your maize crop that you're talking about is just about to flower. Rains pretty much disappeared Jan, Feb, March. And the ripple effects across the economy are huge. And it's also at the same time kind of I always think about it as an extremely slow moving car crash that you can do nothing about, right? So pretty much the breadbasket of East Africa had a huge drought. We have been working with the Bayer Foundation since 2017. We first started with a pilot where we effectively paid for insurance. Why did we pay for insurance? In this case, the Bayer Foundation, we convinced them, spend $200,000 for a demonstration effect, that 30,000 farmers in this case got free insurance. That season in 2017, they had a payout. I've stood at more ceremonies with ministers of agriculture holding these huge dummy checks. I kind of look slightly ridiculous. In last November, I stood with a $40 million dummy check it was the largest payout in African history with the Zambian government. And effectively what we're doing with Bayer is taking this initial step that we started in 2017, which has since grown. We as PULA this last year insured over 6 million farmers, to take it to another 10 million farmers. Because as Matthias was saying, I have in Dutch we would say bloedhekel, which means I really don't like pilots. I call them pilotitis. I think we need to think about how we scale. And what we've seen in our first pilot in 2017, I said it took us a while to figure things out, because particularly in agriculture, you get kind of one try a year, you know, and that also makes farmers extremely risk averse, right? Imagine if all of our salaries only came once a year instead of once a month, and we could, you know, if we made one wrong decision, you know, our annual salary would basically dissipate, right? So we started off with $200,000, 30,000 farmers, worked with government. And this is something that people are usually extremely uncomfortable with. African governments, Rose, you guys work with African governments. Do you trust them? Aren't, you know, you're going to get stuck with bribery, corruption scandals. And I'm like, if you do not work with governments, you're literally ignoring the elephant in the room, and you're ignoring the opportunity for scale. The job I had before joining Syngenta, I actually worked for Rwandan Minister of Agriculture, and I learned that most of these governments are looking at how to help and support their communities. And I think if you do, you can have the potential. In Zambia, where you're building this seed factory, 1 in 3 farmers has our insurance product. Actually, 1 in 3 people has our insurance product. That is the kind of scale that I live for, that I get excited about. I'm like, okay, so how do we do this more? We built, after the program that we're launching today to reach 10 million farmers, we start off with sponsoring maybe 30 to 100,000 farmers getting free insurance. We have a payout. We invite the Minister of Agriculture, or the President if we can, right, to show, hey, this insurance really works. And then we convince them and farmers to price the cost of insurance into something else. So if they access seeds, fertilizer, then they also now have insurance embedded. If they access credit, it's already embedded. So it becomes sustainable. In the case of what we did with Bayer, that $200,000 turned into $6.5 million from government and farmers. That's a 32x catalyst. I did the maths again because he asked me exactly what the number was. And I had to do some long division. I was like, man, I'm in insurance and my actuarial skills sometimes are really horrible. But anyway, so we are basically looking at getting 10 million farmers access to insurance. And for me, this is not just about insurance, it's about dignity, right? It's about the dignity of not having to beg for handouts after you've lost your crop. It's about that dignity of farmers. I have paid for this, right? I deserve this. For me, that is really what this is about. So for me, it's 10 million farmers having the dignity and the ability to really, be able to bounce back, because climate change is here, but we can give farmers the tools.
And just a quick follow-up question there. Is the insurance product one that covers the loss of income, or it is the loans of the farmers?
So it's usually input investment. It's those investments in seed and fertilizer. And if you think about it, this is a journey, right? Of course, it'd be great if they could insure their whole income. But insuring your whole income maybe will cost you, I kind of always put this in the farming phrases if we're talking to farmers. We could decide that we are going to insure, your income, but it would cost you a cow. Or we could decide that you're going to insure your seeds and your fertilizer, and it's probably going to cost you a chicken. They're like, okay, I can start with a chicken, I'll see if what you're doing is going to work, and then maybe over time I'll work my way up to that cow, right?
Thanks for clarifying. Luis, sometimes there is a concern, right, that indeed it's not even a question of always pilots, but that beautiful work is sometimes done on a small scale, right? And you can get extraordinary results, right, in a community. Is it possible to scale the kind of work that you're talking about?
Okay, so we first have to imagine what regenerative really means. So if regeneration is the process of creating conditions for life to thrive, we have to look at nature and ask nature, how does it create those conditions? And in the soil, we have the secret. So the mycelial networks in the soil work in a very particular way. And if you look at what they do, they actually are responsible for an incredible amount of interactions that allow, the forest and crops to be healthy. But they work in a distributed manner. They work in a reactive manner where, the most resources go to the places with most need. So it's very dynamic, very resilient, very responsive. And in that sense, we have a big challenge. We've created a food system that is really based on scale, is based on concentration, and creating large product to move through frontiers in the world. But if you look at nature, nature works local to regional to bioregional. And really, the excesses are transferred. But the priority is in the local and the bioregional. So this is, I think, the challenge. We need to transition a system that is definitely not working like nature would work, so it's not regenerative, to an emergent system that we still don't know how to work and cannot work under the same infrastructure of the old system. So this is the big challenge. And in that process, we need to start, in order to think of scaling, I don't think it's necessarily scaling up, scaling wide, scaling deep. And it has to do with understanding the true qualities of each territory, each culture, each bioregion, because that's where knowledge is. Like Juan said, people, history, their ancestrality is coming in that relationship with the land. So thinking at ways that bioregions can actually strengthen and structure processes that guarantee agriculture that is in purpose and in service of them, and then in service of the world, is going to be critical, because that will definitely be the best insurance for them, because they'll have distributed regenerative systems that are much more resilient to climate, that are creating a safety in terms of, using the soil qualities and capacities to protect them from floods, to protect them from drought, to protect them from all the other issues we are facing. So while building bioregional hubs of food production, creating local autonomy in terms of food, you're also transitioning a global system that needs to interact with that bioregional local system. So we need to be very careful when we speak of regenerative agriculture, because regenerative agriculture ultimately cannot be done at scale if we want to go deep, only if we're in the superficial practices and processes. So we really need to focus on how we combine processes that actually work from the bioregions up, consolidate bioregions, help create what I call mosaics of regeneration, where conservation, restoration, and production work hand in hand to ensure pollinators, ensure restoration and healing the territory. At the same time, we create value chains that actually interact in that manner, start replicating nature in their mechanisms, in their interactions, and in the way they work. So think of the future of food systems. It's like a mycelial network, and we have to think that way, and which is very different to the lineal, current food systems and value chains. So I think there's a big transition that has to happen over the next few decades, but it's the biggest challenge we have. That is, for me, scaling, going from that value chains in line to a mycelial network value change that really responds and guarantees the well-being of people, the territories, and the support systems that allow us to produce.
I heard that correctly, from value chains to value change.
No, value change to mycelial value networks or value weaves.
I see you want to jump in, Matthias.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't use the two-letter word too often. We started 5 years ago with a very simple question. Organic farming is lower in yield than conventional farming, but the gap is lower than you would normally think. So organic farming somehow has a productivity boost. So if you combine that with what's also possible at the intersection of biology, chemistry, and artificial intelligence, the question was, will that be a more regenerative system, and what will it do to yield? So that was one of the research questions I brought in when I joined, and we did a 5-year study. And unfortunately, in agriculture, things take a bit longer. And the result is regenerative agriculture has all the benefits you were talking about for the soil and increases yield. So it's an and, not an or. And it can happen at large scale. So we work with some of the really large agriculture companies in Brazil and in Argentina, where you would think, not sure whether they could make this transition. Not only can they make this transition, they ultimately end up with a better economic model. And that drives my optimism that things are scalable because they are attractive to be adapted. But it's small and larger structures. And I think we can learn a lot from Brazil and Argentina. What went wrong in the Cerrado miracle, in the kind of rise of agricultural productivity in that region? What needs to happen differently in the last frontier, which is Africa? We can learn a lot, but we should avoid a conversation that kind of already preempts what the right size is, what the right scale is. But I do also agree with the linearity topic. Linear systems are by definition less resilient. No? That's by definition true as well. But the good news I want to convey is these things are possible in large farms, and there is no downside when it comes to productivity, which we need to meet your challenge.
just throwing in a little factoid here, is there's a movement in the UK and in other countries to rewild, so to take a conventional farm and to just let nature take over, for example. And that looks beautiful. You have gorgeous pictures, right, of going from conventional, horrible industrial agriculture to wilderness. But the problem is, right, whatever was being grown there is now no longer being grown there. Where does one think that food is coming from? If it's not coming from the UK anymore, it's probably coming from Brazil, from Argentina. And so you've just displaced the problem from the UK to another part of the world, right? A ton of carbon emitted in one part of the world within just a couple of days is spread everywhere, right? So just displacing the problem to another place has solved nothing at all, right? So that beautiful notion, very romantic, doesn't solve anything very much. Right? But you, Christian, you are redefining the pathway in a sense, right? You are offering an additional, it's not an or, it's an and, right, to this pathway. Can you say a little bit more? Can you go a little bit more into detail to explain? Because it's not something everyone will be familiar with.
I'm happy to do that. So first of all, I'm getting back to you, Matthias. I'm very pleased to hear that you use the and word instead of the or, and this is exactly how we see it as well. So we should not talk about, oh, your solution is better than our, or ours is better than yours. I mean, to tackle that big problem, I think we need all of us to have a major impact. So our contribution is technology. So we develop technology. Back to your question, Fredrik, now. So we develop technology allowing us to preserve plants, actually, by just taking, for instance, a small biopsy of the plant, and then grow it in a steel tank, and this plant material, forever, well protected, and we use about 200 times less water. So this is one solution. This is one technology. It's called plant cell culture. We apply it. We currently make coffee and cocoa based on plant cells. So we produce in Switzerland, we produce coffee. We make cocoa grow in Switzerland. That's not a very tropical country, as I mean, here in Davos, it doesn't look very tropical. So that's our contribution. So we highlight. Maybe if you wait another 200 years, maybe it already gets warmer than when I was a child coming here for skiing. So that's our contribution. So we emphasize that one should not exclude one, tool, to use your words, Rose, you give to the farmer. So I like the idea of covering the business of farmers by insurance. I think it's much needed. I think in addition to that, I like leaving nature, more to nature and see what's getting out of that with all the consequences you just mentioned. But then again, we also need novel technology, and that's what drives us every day, working hard to come up with technologies we can provide to the world.
And what's the consumer acceptance of eating chocolate or drinking coffee that has been grown in a steel tank? Steel tank.
Very good. I mean, actually, you should taste it. I mean, it's
have it here.
We should have it here, and you're more than welcome to taste it. So it's delicious. I mean, we know that if the product is ultimately not good, there will be no consumer. So that's the other drive. So of course, we want to have efficient technologies, but at the same time, we're working hard to make a product to be really delicious. So we like it. We eat. In our company, we eat daily, consume daily our products, and we love them. And we have investors coming, we have customers coming, we have big food companies being interested in our products. We make all of them taste our products, and they love it. So the consumer acceptance, I cannot give you a percentage. There will always be some people saying, "Oh, I don't want that," But we believe the vast majority will simply accept it because it's good.
Okay, thank you, guys. Juan, what about this question of scale? Right? Is it possible to do? Do you embrace it? Are you nervous about that? How do you respond? And you feel free to answer in Spanish if you want.
Gracias. Me parece que tenemos que hablar con los consumidores.
We have to speak with the consumers.
Y contarles que tenemos un problema.
That we have a problem.
Que hay muy buenas intenciones y mucho trabajo.
And a lot to do.
De diferentes lugares.
From different places.
Pero si no cambiamos la manera de comer,
but if we don't change the way we eat,
es muy difícil poder generar una comida que regenere.
It's otherwise very difficult to create regenerative food production.
Para nosotros comer con propósito es un próximo paso.
So the first step is actually to consume, to eat with purpose.
Llevar la comida a una experiencia donde cada bocado sea una conexión.
Every bite should be a connection.
Yes. Los restaurantes son muy importantes en este proceso.
And involving restaurants is very important in that process, and the chef that you work with. Yeah.
Y bueno, para no hacerla larga, pero entiendo que si sumamos a los consumidores a esta charla, vamos a poder trabajar en conjunto y encontrar una solución.
There's a beautiful complementarity, right? Because you are talking about it from the consumer side, and we've tended to talk about the production.
Porque la suma de las partes siempre es mucho más que dos.
Yeah, yeah. The sum of all the parts is much more than the individual elements. Thank you, Juan.
No, a ustedes.
Okay. Can we open it up to questions, please? I'm sure you have some for this remarkable group. Yes, please. Because we have people online.
I walked in. I'm Mike Morseberger from the University of the Virgin Islands. We have an agriculture school, and fishers and farmers have become a big sort of rallying cry in the islands. And so I came in 9 or 10 minutes late. This may have been covered. But when we talk about sustainability and all these kinds of things, just being candid, Bayer bought Monsanto. We genetically modified foods, things of this nature. Where does the panel stand on such things? Is there any contradiction in terms related to these things? I'm just curious. I don't know.
Yes, please. I'm going to invite a couple of questions at least, please.
Okay, so I like your comment on connecting. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Yes, Federico Rivera. I'm from Costa Rica, and we have a manufacturing facility for dehydrated foods, 45 foods. It's a social business, so very interested in these topics. And what I'm interested is about this. It's said that we produce more food daily than it's consumed. About 40% of the food actually we produce and put on tables is waste. And we have enough food to feed the 8 billion people that we are, but we're just not bringing it to the right places for people to get fed, and that's a problem. So that connection that you were mentioning, Juan Ignacio, I think that's very important to rationalize how we consume the food itself. You were mentioning before that 70% of the water is already used. We cannot double it, sure, but 70% is already enough, more than enough food produced to be consumed. We're not just being efficient, and we just live in a world that is used to just abundance, and to the point that it becomes waste.
Thank you. Will you pass it?
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin from Kickstart, promoting smallholder irrigation across sub-Saharan Africa. Just a quick question, Rolis. Maybe I missed it, but for that $6.5 million, is that paid by the farmers or paid by the government? And what's the cost per farmer? And how does that, if it's split between the farmers and the government, how did that break down? Thanks.
Well, thanks for this first round of questions, please.
There was another one.
We'll come to him later.
Sure. I'll start with mine. Very straightforward. So we have, in different places, different modalities. On average, a farmer last year paid about $6 in premium. It's per season, not per year. And in some, I've learned that every market has its own peculiarities. So for example, Ethiopia, where we're growing a very large program, the government does not believe in any subsidy, so farmers have to pay. In Zimbabwe, the government does not believe farmers should pay at all, so the government pays the whole thing. In Zambia, they split it evenly. So I've learned that no answer is right. To give you some global stats, there's 195 countries in the world, latest UN number, whichever number there is, about 90 of those countries have agriculture insurance systems, and about 90% of those countries have a subsidy. An average insurance subsidies by government is about 68%, just so that you have the global stats. US, China, India, like, spend the most on this. It's pretty common.
Thank you.
I can go connecting the other two questions. And I do think one of the critical aspects to understand is that both resilience and the content in nutrition is also related to, the diversity of seeds. So it's really fundamental to recuperate, to bank, and to start building a base of all the ancestral seeds that have been lost. So that's why I think, Juan's work is so critical. It is seen also that there are many seeds and food products that are not really used commercially because they don't make sense in the current system. But locally, they play a role both in their ancestral culinary histories, and their nutritional values are higher. So we can also really strengthen the capacity to create resilience locally by recuperating a lot of the local food products, local cuisine, and giving it value. So it's no longer a thing, like Matthias was saying, it's no longer or, it's and, Yeah, you can eat processed foods, and, local foods are really important. We need to recuperate that value so people can appropriate, and produce those things. And on the other hand, when we look at conscious food systems, we collaborate for a couple of years with the Conscious Food System Alliance. So this is a little pioneering project based on UNDP, and you should definitely look into it because we're working with farmers around the world in different areas. One is creating or strengthening inner dimensions of farming. So how do we build resilience culturally and emotionally on the farmers and create well-being? Because they're being hit hard with all the changes and the pressures they have. So this is one part of it. And the other is conscious consumers. How do we really get to creating a level of conscious consumers that it's not only about intentional purchasing, mechanistic, but also about that emotional connection, that love, that attitude of empathy, and that understanding that when I put a drop of honey in my tongue, I'm actually putting a drop of the collaboration of thousands, if not millions of organisms to create that magical moment. And I think this is where the magic of food starts making a deeper sense, because we realize that, all the nourishment we get ultimately is the product of radical collaborations around the world. So this is something really important in consumer consciousness.
Anyone have a response? I'll come to you, Juan. But anyone respond to the question on genetically modified organisms?
I mean, I was doing a happy dance when the last Nobel Prize was awarded to Demis Hassabis. Nobel Prize for chemistry. I studied chemistry, so it was very exciting for me to kind of see that. Demis, together with many, many unknown people, all the people that helped him to train the model, most of them European scientists, got the Nobel Prize for being able to identify the three-dimensional structure of almost 300 million proteins. In this century, people got a Nobel Prize for identifying the three-dimensional structure of one protein. This is a shift that is happening with the help of AI that is not understood and along this promenade not talked about enough. We have a revolution in biology. You are a biorevolutionary with what you are doing. Yeah? I mean, I worked in cocoa. It's super, super complex. The taste flavors in cocoa to get there. It would have been impossible a few years ago. We now know the protein folding problem is solved. We know the three-dimensional structure of proteins. Things are possible. To your question on biotechnology, we will have innovation opportunities where biology, chemistry, and AI intersect that are amazing in the health space and equally amazing in the food space. One of the reasons why I believe we're going to solve the riddle you gave us. Yeah? So my journey was I was an anti-GMO activist, so I kind of moved very far. So I kind of changed my mind a couple of times on things, and I'm sure I will continue to do that. I hope a bit, yeah, to learn. But I have a very strong conviction that we are talking about very different technologies. I'll give you a practical example. The soil is full of bacteria. We all know that. Yeah? The spoon of soil with what's all in there. Yeah? In some living soil there is more, in other depleted soil there is less. This bacteria is able to do what the Haber-Bosch process does, to convert atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogen that can be chemically used. We don't need to put that bacteria in the soil, it's there. Some crops can easily partner with that bacteria. The good old soybean is a good example, lentils are good examples. Other crops, corn, rice, wheat, also can do that, but at a scale that is completely off when it comes to the amount of proteins we want to produce with those crops. I bet you that we will be able to replace the Haber-Bosch process that feeds half of the world population with plants, irrespective of whether they are legumes or not, that can partner with this bacteria to grow the food we need, and that reduces the whopping number of 4% of all carbon emissions in the world. That's the scale of what's possible.
Maybe explain what the Haber-Bosch process is.
Haber-Bosch is German chemists who basically found a way to, with a lot of energy, a lot of pressure being involved, to transform atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, which then has been used as fertilizer, which is the reason why we are 8 billion people. Without that, we would be 4.5, I would say. Yeah.
And Bayer has played a big role.
Well, to be very honest, we played a big role once paying an insurance bill for a BASF factory blowing up, but BASF is really deserving the credit for it. But but I would like to disrupt that. And what it would mean is farmers wouldn't need to pay for fertilizer. That's really important. That's 20-25%. In your world, even more of the input. 70 in Africa. And as a result, food would be cheaper. So these are the kind of scalable things I would like to think we make possible. We need these technologies because food inflation is our enemy. I believe food inflation no longer is a problem of the ag cycle. It's stubborn and permanent. Yeah, core inflation removes energy and food usually. The central banks stopped to do that. Their models somehow don't work anymore because food inflation works in a funny way. And to bring that to life, the region you are working in the year 2000, spent $10 billion importing food. There is no need to spend $10 billion to import food into Africa.
Absolutely.
25 years later, by the end of this year, inflation will have gone up 85%. The food import bill in Africa has gone up tenfold. So we are talking about 100 million of food imports. And that's money governments don't have to scale insurance, to build schools, to build health systems, to build livable rural and urban areas. So what I'm trying to say here is the solutions we need to look for need also be solutions that tackle a problem that will be stubborn thanks to climate change, which is food inflation.
Juani, there was a question directed to you.
Voy a ser cortito para... Un productor ancestral que usa tecnología ancestral.
A traditional producer who uses traditional technology.
Produce, por ejemplo, de papa, 1 tonelada por hectárea.
Produces a ton, for example.
Una papa antigua con mucho nutriente.
Yes.
El otro lado, otro productor produce 50 toneladas por hectárea.
And another one produces 50 tons.
Y está mucho más cerca del mercado.
And is closer to the market.
Entonces, el pequeño productor, ¿qué hace? Tiene que...
What does the small producer do?
Para nosotros, el productor de 1 tonelada vende experiencia, no kilos.
Okay. And the traditional producer, in our view, is selling experience, not just potatoes.
Y esa experiencia ayuda a que los kilos vayan mejorando lentamente.
Okay. And in that way, sorry?
esa experiencia ayuda a que los kilos o la otra parte vaya lentamente mejorando también.
Okay. And in that way, selling that, it improves actually what's being done.
Tal vez ahora no parece importante, pero conservar a los productores en un sistema de conservación de productores ancestrales en un futuro va a ser muy importante.
Yeah. So really preserving those traditional producers is extremely important if we are serious about producing.
No exigirles que sean ellos los que produzcan.
And not force them to adopt these new methods. Thank you. Shiv, you had a question? And that will be the last.
Thank you, Fred. Many of what you're saying, Luis, I've heard you so many times. It's like poetry. Thank you. Thank you for what you're saying, and thank you for what you're doing. One quick question is that, to me, organic farming seems to be a very selfish consumer safety, whereas regenerative agriculture is both the farmers and that of the consumer. So that's something many of you made as point. My question to you is that how do we actually sell regenerative agriculture to consumers? Because without the consumers buying it, we really don't have, it's very market-led.
Okay, so I'll take lead. Thank you, Shiv. First of all, organic farming and regenerative farming is not the same. So we have industrial organic farming, which has the same biases and same, let's say, byproducts of traditional, with the exception maybe of the fertilizers and some of the chemicals associated. But it's still a problem. So in order to answer this question, we really need to understand how regenerative farming ultimately works, and that mycelial network of distribution that we were talking. If we're thinking in the future of a fully regenerative agricultural system, which we can only imagine because it will emerge, we don't know how it's going to work. It's a mycelial, network. I mentioned that. That means that the consumer is local in general, is bioregional. So most of the produce is going to be very efficient. It's going to reduce the need for transport, the need for storage, the need for many of the elements that actually create a lot of the emissions and the problems we have today. So that's one mechanism that should move there. In the transition, I do think that one of the key aspects is really creating the culture of value added to regenerative products, so product source of regenerative farming. From what I've understood and working with companies like Nature's Pride in Europe, the really big complexity is that in the market, price is still king. So it's not about practices, it's not about responsibility, it's prices. And we're having the same price competition and the regulations. You can increase regulations, but if you keep pushing prices down, regulations will be met. But who is going to suffer the cost? The farmers. And this is happening in Peru, this is happening in Chile, in places where nobody in this area of the world would even understand the conditions, of a desertified water, private water, water catchment systems, where communities that are producing all your vegetables that we purchase here don't have water, they don't have food. So this is a real complex issue. And we really need to, if we have companies that are creating transparent, regenerative agriculture, capacity to sell these products, then we need to really bring value. Or if we're going to have subsidies, we need to bring the subsidies there so they can actually work with and compete adequately with the non-regenerative products. And that way we can actually speed up regenerative agriculture and do the change. And that's why I was saying it's not, as you said, or, it's and. We need to start mixing, but we need to open the space for the emergent regenerative systems to be able to participate in the market with the same conditions now. And then that will shift, because it will shift to a different kind of economy of food.
I'm going to allow myself, because we're just a bit over time, but so Catalyst now is a movement for cross-sectoral collaboration. It's all about the and so thank you, Matthias. It's and the consumer, right? It's and different sources of production. It's and insurance. and many other things that are represented in this movement. So thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this incredible panel. And I'm sure they'll be around a little longer to take further questions from you if you want. Thank you.